The shuttle descended through clouds of purple gas, and Daniel Cole pressed his face against the window like a child seeing snow for the first time. The throne world of the Empire stretched below him, a planet of dark mountains and silver cities that seemed to grow from the rock itself. He had seen photographs during the briefing sessions back on Earth, but nothing had prepared him for the real thing. Ambassador Marsh sat across from him with her hands folded in her lap. She was a woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back tight and eyes that had seen too many negotiations go wrong. She noticed Daniel staring out the window and allowed herself a small smile. "First contact with an alien civilization," she said. "How does it feel?" Daniel turned to look at her. "Terrifying," he admitted, "but also exciting. We are actually doing this." "We are," agreed. "And we need to do it right. They have conquered dozens of star systems. They have never met a species they considered equal. Our job is to convince them that humanity deserves respect." The shuttle touched down on a landing platform that overlooked the capital city. Daniel gathered his diplomatic case and followed Ambassador Marsh down the ramp. The air was thin and carried a strange metallic taste. He had to remind himself to breathe slowly. The delegation was waiting for them. Daniel had studied images of them during his preparation, but seeing them in person was something else entirely. They stood over 9 feet tall, with bodies covered in dark iridescent armor that was not clothing but their actual skin. Their faces were angular and insect-like, with multiple eyes that reflected the light in unsettling ways. Their arms ended in hands that had both fingers and curved blades built into the structure. Commander Hal stepped forward. He was even larger than the others, with scars across his carapace that spoke of many battles. He looked down at the humans with obvious contempt. "You are smaller than we expected," he said. His voice was deep and carried a clicking undertone. "Follow, the Queen waits." They walked through corridors of polished black stone. Daniel noticed that every they passed stopped to stare at them. Some made sounds that might have been laughter. Others simply watched with those strange, multifaceted eyes. The throne room was a vast chamber with a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. Thousands of filled the space, standing in perfect rows on either side of a central path. At the far end, on a throne carved from a single massive crystal, sat Queen. She was the largest Daniel had ever seen. Her carapace was the color of deep space, scattered with points of light that seemed to move and shift. Her eyes fixed on the approaching humans with an intensity that made Daniel want to turn and run. Ambassador Marsh walked forward with her head held high. Daniel and the other aides followed close behind. "Your Majesty," began, bowing according to the protocol they had studied. "On behalf of the United Earth Government, I thank you for receiving us. We come seeking friendship and mutual understanding between our peoples." Queen leaned forward on her throne. When she spoke, her voice filled the entire chamber without effort. "Friendship," she repeated. The word sounded strange in her mouth. "The do not seek friendship. We seek only to understand which species are worthy of existence and which are not." She tilted her head, studying the humans. "You are very soft, very small. I see no claws, no armor, no natural weapons of any kind. Tell me, Ambassador, how has your species survived this long?" Kept her composure. "We have survived through cooperation, Your Majesty, through ingenuity and determination. We may lack the physical gifts but we have other strengths." "Other strengths," the Queen said, and this time there was no mistaking the amusement in her voice. The chamber made clicking sounds that seemed to be laughter. "How charming! We shall see." The formal presentation continued. Ambassador Marsh outlined humanity's history, their technological achievements, their hopes for peaceful coexistence with the Empire. Daniel stood with the other aides, trying to remain still and professional despite the hostile stares from all around. Then something happened. One of the junior diplomats, a young woman named, stumbled. Her foot caught on an uneven stone in the floor and she pitched forward, her documents scattering. Without thinking, Daniel stepped out of line and caught her arm, steadying her before she could fall. The chamber went silent. Commander Hal was on them in an instant. He grabbed Daniel by the collar and lifted him off the ground with one hand. "You broke formation," the commander snarled. "You moved without permission in the presence of the Queen. This is a grave insult. Our law demands punishment." "He was only helping," Ambassador Marsh said quickly. "Please, Commander, it was an innocent mistake." "Innocent or not, the law is clear," Hal said. "This human must be punished. I suggest we remove one of his limbs as a lesson." Daniel hung in the commander's grip, his feet dangling above the floor. His heart was pounding, but he forced himself to stay calm. Panic would not help anyone. Queen raised one of her bladed hands, and the chamber fell silent again. "A limb seems excessive for such a small creature," she said. She studied Daniel with renewed interest. He moved to help another. "This is curious behavior. Among the weakness is never assisted. It is eliminated." She stood from her throne and descended the steps toward the humans. Up close, she was even more terrifying. Daniel could see the serrated edges on her limbs, designed by evolution for cutting through armor and bone. "I have a different punishment in mind," the Queen said. "This human will serve as my personal attendant for the duration of the negotiations. He will see how to live. He will understand true strength." Ambassador Marsh opened her mouth to protest, but stopped herself. Daniel could see the calculation in her eyes. Refusing the Queen's offer could doom the entire mission. "I accept," Daniel said before could speak. The Queen's eyes focused on him with new interest. "You accept. You do not wait for your leader to decide." "With respect, Your Majesty, this is my mistake to pay for. Ambassador Marsh has a mission to complete. I will not let my error ruin it." The Queen was silent for a long moment. Then she made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Take him," she said to the guards. "Perhaps this one will be more entertaining than I expected." Daniel was pulled away from the delegation. He caught one last glimpse of Ambassador Marsh's worried face before the doors closed behind him. The guards led him deep into the palace, through corridors that grew darker and narrower. Finally, they reached a section that smelled of despair. Daniel saw cells lining the walls, and inside those cells he saw aliens of many different species. They were thin and broken, with empty eyes that had lost all hope. Slaves that kept slaves. A guard shoved Daniel into a small room and sealed the door behind him. He stood alone in the darkness, listening to the sounds of suffering all around him. But Daniel Cole did not despair. He had been raised to believe that every problem had a solution. He had been taught that giving up was never an option. And as he sat down on the cold floor of his cell, he began to think. The Queen believed he was weak. She would learn otherwise. Daniel woke to the sound of metal scraping against stone. A guard stood in the doorway of his cell, blocking what little light came from the corridor. The clicked his mandibles in what Daniel had learned was a sign of impatience. "Rise, human, the Queen requires you." Daniel stood slowly. His body ached from sleeping on the hard floor, but he did not complain. He followed the guard through winding passages until they reached the upper levels of the palace, where everything was clean and polished and beautiful in a cold sort of way. His duties were simple but endless. He carried trays of food that smelled strange and looked stranger. He cleaned floors on his hands and knees while nobles walked past without looking at him. He fetched items from storage rooms and stood silently in corners while the Queen conducted her business. The guards took pleasure in making his work harder. They would knock items from his hands and then punish him for dropping them. They would trip him in the corridors and laugh when he fell. One guard in particular, a warrior named L, seemed to have made tormenting Daniel his personal hobby. On the third day, L struck Daniel across the back with the flat of his blade. The blow sent Daniel sprawling to the floor, his vision going white with pain. Stay down, soft creature, El said. Know your place. Daniel lay there for a moment, breathing through the pain. Then slowly, carefully, he pushed himself back to his feet. He picked up the tray he had dropped and continued walking as if nothing had happened. El stared after him with confusion in his many eyes. This became the pattern of Daniel's days. The guards would hurt him and he would get back up. They would humiliate him and he would keep working. He never fought back, never showed anger, never gave them the satisfaction of seeing him break. Princess El noticed him on the 5th day. She was younger than the other royalty, her carapace still carrying the lighter colors of youth. She watched Daniel from across the throne room as he stood waiting for orders, and later she appeared in the corridor where he was working. Human, she said, stop. Daniel stopped and bowed his head respectfully. Yes, Princess. I have seen you fall 7 times today. 7 times you have risen again. Why do you not stay down? Surely it would be easier. Daniel considered the question. Where I come from, Princess, we have a saying, fall down 7 times, stand up 8. Giving up is not something we do. That is foolish, El said. If a falls in battle, it means they have met a superior opponent. There is no shame in accepting defeat. With respect, Princess, I have not been defeated. I have only been knocked down. Those are different things. El tilted her head, studying him the way her mother had done. You are strange, human. I will observe you further. She walked away, and Daniel returned to his work. That night the guards brought him to the slave quarters to sleep. It was a large chamber filled with aliens from a dozen different species, all of them broken and hopeless. They lay on thin mats on the floor, too tired and defeated to even speak to one another. Daniel sat down next to an elderly alien named. He was from a species called the, covered in thin gray fur with large, sad eyes. His people had been conquered by the generations ago. You are the human, said quietly. We have heard about you. They say you refuse to break. I am trying, Daniel admitted. It does not matter, said. Everyone breaks eventually. They are patient. They will destroy your spirit just as they destroyed ours. Daniel was silent for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of bread he had hidden from his dinner. He broke it in half and offered one piece to. Here, you need it more than I do. Stared at the bread as if he did not understand what it was. You would share your food, but you barely have enough for yourself. I will survive, please take it. Took the bread with trembling hands. Tears formed in his large eyes. No one has shown me kindness in 30 years, he whispered. Word spread among the slaves. Each night, Daniel would share whatever food he could hide, going hungry himself so that others could eat a little more. He listened to their stories and learned their names. He taught them small things, like how to stretch their rations and how to treat minor wounds with materials they could find in the palace. Slowly, something changed in the slave quarters. There was still fear, still despair, but there was also a tiny spark of something else. Hope, perhaps, or at least the memory of what hope had felt like. Princess El continued to watch Daniel. She devised tests for him, ordering him to carry loads that should have been impossible for his small frame. She made him climb stairs until his legs shook. She sent him running messages across the vast palace and demanded he return in impossible time. Daniel failed some of these tests. His body had limits that they did not share, but he never quit before he failed. He pushed until his muscles gave out, until his lungs burned, until his vision went dark, and he always tried again the next day. One evening, Elle found him collapsed in a corridor after one of her challenges. She stood over him, watching him struggle to breathe. Why do you do this? She asked. You cannot win. You will never be as strong as us. Why do you keep trying? Daniel looked up at her. His face was pale and covered in sweat, but his eyes were clear. Because trying is all I have, Princess. And because someone has to show the slaves that giving up is a choice, not a requirement. You care about the slaves. They are nothing. They are less than nothing. They are people, every single one of them. They have names and memories and dreams that your empire has tried to crush. But as long as one person remembers that they matter, those dreams survive. Elle was quiet for a long time. Then she walked away without another word. The next morning, Queen summoned Daniel to attend a grand feast. Dignitaries from across the empire were arriving to witness the negotiations with humanity. The Queen wished to demonstrate her power, and part of that demonstration involved showing off her new human servant. "You will kneel before my guests," she told Daniel. "You will declare that humanity is inferior to the. You will admit that your species is not worthy of independence." Daniel stood in his worn and dirty clothes before the most powerful being in 100 star systems. Guards surrounded him. The entire court was watching. "I cannot do that, Your Majesty," he said quietly. Queen's eyes narrowed. "You refuse me, in my own palace. You understand what will happen if you defy me." "I do, Your Majesty, but I cannot speak lies about my people. I am just one man and I do not represent all of humanity, but I can represent myself and I will not kneel." The Queen rose from her throne. Her bladed limbs gleamed in the light of 1,000 crystals. "Then you will learn what happens to those who defy the Empire." She gestured to her guards, and they moved forward. Daniel did not run. He stood his ground and waited for what was coming. The great feast hall was filled with thousands of nobles and warriors and priests, all gathered to witness the humiliation of the human who dared to defy their queen. Long tables covered in exotic foods lined the walls, but no one was eating. Every eye was fixed on Daniel. Queen's voice echoed through the chamber. "You have one more chance, human. Kneel. Declare your kind inferior. Perhaps I will show mercy." Daniel looked around the hall. He saw Ambassador Marsh standing with the human delegation, her face frozen in professional calm but her eyes betraying her fear. He saw Princess Elle watching from behind a pillar, her expression unreadable. He saw the visiting dignitaries from conquered worlds, aliens who had once been proud and free, now broken and obedient. He thought about what kneeling would mean, not just for him, but for every human who would come after. If he gave in now, humanity would forever be seen as a species that could be broken with enough pressure. "I am sorry, Your Majesty," Daniel said, and his voice did not shake. "I cannot." The Queen made a sharp gesture with one bladed limb. "Beat him until he submits." The first blow came from behind. A guard struck Daniel across the shoulders with a staff made of polished bone. He staggered forward but kept his feet. The second blow caught him in the ribs. He felt something crack and the pain took his breath away. He fell to his knees. For a moment the hall was silent. Then Daniel placed his hands on the floor and pushed himself back up. The guards looked at each other in confusion. They struck him again, harder this time. Daniel fell. He rose. He fell. He rose. Blood began to flow from cuts on his face and arms where the staff had torn his skin. "Stay down, fool," one of the guards hissed. "The Queen will kill you." Daniel said nothing. He simply stood again. The beating continued. Daniel lost count of how many times he fell. Each time the floor rushed up to meet him, he thought this would be the time he could not rise. Each time, he found some reserve of strength he did not know he had. He thought of his parents back on Earth. He thought of the slaves in the palace who had no one to fight for them. He thought of what it meant to be human. Humans had survived ice ages. Humans had survived plagues that killed half their population. Humans had survived wars that threatened to end their civilization. They had done this not because they were the strongest or the fastest, but because they refused to quit. Daniel stood again. The hall had gone completely silent. Even the guards had stopped moving. They stared at this small, bleeding creature who simply would not stay down. Admiral Ra approached the Queen's throne. He was an older with silver markings on his carapace that indicated decades of military service. He leaned close to speak in her ear. "Your Majesty, I have been studying human records since their arrival. May I share what I have learned?" The queen nodded, her eyes still fixed on Daniel. "Their world is what we would classify as a death world," Ra said quietly. "Extreme temperature variations, violent geological activity, predators at every level of their food chain. By all logic, they should have gone extinct millions of years ago." "And yet they did not," the queen said. "They did not. They have faced what they call extinction-level events repeatedly throughout their history: asteroid impacts, supervolcano eruptions, self-inflicted catastrophes that killed billions. Every time they rebuilt, every time they came back stronger." The admiral paused. "My analysts cannot explain it. They call it an anomaly in our models. The humans seem to possess something we cannot measure or quantify." "What?" "They simply refuse to accept defeat. It is not logical, it is not efficient, but it is effective." Queen watched as Daniel fell once more. His eyes were swollen nearly shut. His clothes were soaked with blood. One of his arms hung at an angle that suggested broken bones. He stood again. "Enough," the queen said, raising her hand. The guard stepped back immediately. "Enough." She descended from her throne and walked across the hall until she stood directly before Daniel. Up close, she could see the damage that had been done to him. By all rights, he should be unconscious or dead. Yet he stood there, swaying slightly but standing. "Why?" she asked, and for the first time her voice held something other than contempt. "What do you hope to accomplish? You cannot win this fight, you cannot hurt us. You are nothing." Daniel looked up at her through his ruined eyes. When he spoke, his voice was rough but clear. "I am not trying to win, Your Majesty. I am trying to show you something." "Show me what?" "That strength is not only about claws and armor. It is about will. It is about standing for what you believe in even when everything tells you to fall. Your empire is built on power, on forcing others to submit. But you will never truly conquer a species that refuses to submit in their hearts." The queen was silent for a long moment. Around her, the entire court waited. "Take him to the punishment chambers," she finally said. "Give him medical attention. I am not finished with him yet." Guards lifted Daniel carefully, almost gently, and carried him from the hall. As he passed through the crowd, he saw faces he did not expect. Conquered aliens were looking at him with something new in their eyes. Not hope exactly, but the beginning of something that might become hope. Princess Elf followed the guards to the punishment chambers. She waited until they had cleaned Daniel's wounds and left him alone in a cell. Then she entered. Daniel was lying on a stone bench, wrapped in bandages. He turned his head slightly when he heard her approach. "Why?" she asked. It was the same question her mother had asked, but her voice was different, younger, more confused. "Because some things matter more than pain," Daniel said. "Because someone had to show your people that we are not what you think we are." "You are a fool. My mother could have killed you." "Perhaps, but she did not." Elle sat down on the floor near his cell, her long limbs folding beneath her in a way that would have been impossible for a human. She was quiet for a while. "When I was young," she said finally, "I used to dream of exploring beyond our empire, seeing new worlds, meeting new species as equals, not as conqueror and conquered. My mother told me those dreams were weakness." Daniel listened without interrupting. "No one has ever asked me what I want," Elle continued. "I am a princess of the. My purpose is to serve the empire. Personal dreams are irrelevant." "They are not irrelevant," Daniel said quietly. "Your dreams are part of who you are. Denying them does not make you stronger, it just makes you emptier." Elle was silent again. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "The slaves are talking about you. They say you shared your food with them. They say you learned their names. No one has ever done that before. They deserve to be seen. Everyone does." The princess stood and walked to the door of the cell. She stopped and looked back at him. "You are very strange, human. I do not understand you. but I think perhaps I would like to." She left and Daniel closed his eyes. His body was broken and burning with pain, but something inside him felt lighter. In the slave quarters, the whispers continued. The human who would not break. The human who stood up 10 times after falling 9. The human who shared his food and remembered their names. For the first time in generations, the slaves of the empire began to remember what it felt like to hope. 3 days passed while Daniel recovered in the punishment chambers. The physicians had done their work efficiently, setting his broken bones and treating his wounds with medicines that worked faster than anything on Earth. He was still weak and covered in bruises, but he could walk again. On the morning of the 4th day, an alarm began to sound. It was a deep, pulsing tone that seemed to shake the walls themselves. Daniel had never heard anything like it in his time at the palace. Through the small window of his cell, he could see guards running through the corridors with panic in their movements. Something was very wrong. A servant came to his cell a few minutes later. She was a young woman named, one of the slaves Daniel had befriended during his time in the palace. Her large eyes were wide with fear. "There has been an accident," she said quickly. "In the lower levels, the power core that heats the western wing has malfunctioned. There was an explosion." "How bad is it?" "Dozens are trapped, workers and slaves. The explosion released some kind of gas into that section. It is deadly to breathe." His voice broke. "My brother is down there. He works in the maintenance tunnels." Daniel was already moving toward the door. "Take me there." "You cannot help. No one can. The gas will kill anyone who enters. Even the guards will not go in. Their carapace cannot protect them from it." "Take me there anyway." They moved through the palace as quickly as Daniel's injured body would allow. The corridors were chaos. Nobles rushed to secure their valuables while guards tried to maintain order. No one paid attention to one human and one slave moving against the flow of traffic. The entrance to the affected section was blocked by a massive door that had sealed automatically when the alarms triggered. A crowd had gathered, mostly but also slaves who had loved ones trapped inside. Queen herself stood before a portable command station, watching data scroll across holographic screens. "Report," she demanded. An engineer stepped forward. His carapace was stained with soot and he looked exhausted. "The gas continues to spread, Your Majesty. We estimate 47 individuals are trapped, including 12 workers and 35 slaves. Our equipment cannot function in the contaminated atmosphere. The gas interferes with our breathing apparatus." "Can we wait for the gas to clear?" "It will take 6 hours at minimum. The trapped individuals have perhaps 2 hours of breathable air remaining in their section. Some have less." Commander Hal stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we must accept the loss. The risk is too great. We cannot sacrifice more lives in a futile rescue attempt." The Queen's expression was unreadable. "You advise me to let my own people die. I advise you to make the logical choice. 47 lives against the potential loss of rescue teams. The mathematics are clear." Daniel pushed through the crowd until he stood before the command station. Guards moved to stop him, but the Queen raised her hand. "Let him speak." "Your Majesty," Daniel said, "what kind of gas is it?" The engineer looked at the Queen, who nodded permission. "It is a byproduct of the power core's cooling system, a mixture of several toxic compounds. It destroys organic tissue on contact and interferes with our respiratory systems." "What about humans? Have you tested how it affects my species?" The engineer blinked. "No, we did not think it relevant." Daniel turned to the Queen. "Humans evolved on a planet with a very different atmosphere than yours. We have survived in conditions that would kill most species in the galaxy. I request permission to attempt a rescue." The chamber went silent. "You would enter a toxic environment that my own warriors cannot survive?" the Queen asked. "In your current condition, after what you have already endured?" Yes, your majesty. If there is any chance I can help, I have to try. Commander Hal made a sound of disgust. This is foolishness. Let the human kill himself if he wishes. It changes nothing. But the queen was studying Daniel with those ancient, calculating eyes. Why would you risk your life for my people? We have shown you nothing but cruelty since you arrived. Daniel thought about the question. Because they need help. Because I can try when no one else can. Where I come from, that is enough reason. The queen was silent for a long moment. Then she turned to the engineer. Open the door, let him try. Daniel did not wait for the guards to guide him. He tore strips from his shirt and soaked them in water from a nearby fountain. He wrapped them around his face, covering his nose and mouth. It was primitive protection, but it was something. The sealed door opened with a hiss of escaping pressure. Beyond it, the corridor was filled with thick yellow-green fog. Daniel could feel the gas against his exposed skin immediately. It burned, but not badly. Not yet. He walked into the fog. The first 100 meters were the worst. Daniel could barely see his hand in front of his face. His eyes watered and his skin felt like it was on fire. But he kept moving, calling out as he went. Hello, can anyone hear me? I am here to help. A voice answered, weak, desperate, here, please, here. Daniel found them in a collapsed maintenance room. 7 workers, a mixture of and slaves, huddled together in a pocket of slightly clearer air. They stared at him in disbelief. You are the human, one of them said, the one who would not break. We need to move, Daniel said. Can you walk? Some could, others could not. Daniel helped the weakest to their feet and began guiding them back toward the entrance. They were heavy, far heavier than humans, but he supported them as best he could. One step at a time, one breath at a time. He made it to the entrance and handed off the survivors to the waiting medical teams. Then he turned and went back in. 12 trips. Daniel made 12 trips into the toxic fog. Each time his exposure grew worse. His skin blistered. His lungs burned with every breath. Twice he collapsed and had to force himself back to his feet through sheer will. Queen watched every moment through a camera feed from a drone that followed Daniel through the corridors. She saw him carry a worker who outweighed him by 300 pounds. She saw him stop to comfort a terrified slave child before guiding her to safety. She saw him go back again and again when any rational being would have given up. He is not rescuing only slaves, Admiral Ra observed quietly. He is saving our people too, including the guards who beat him. I see it, the Queen said. On his final trip, Daniel found his brother trapped under a fallen beam. The young was barely conscious, his fur matted with blood. Daniel tried to lift the beam, but his strength was gone. His arms shook and his vision was going dark. Leave me, the young alien whispered. Save yourself. No, Daniel said. He braced himself and tried again. The beam did not move. Please, you have done enough. Daniel looked at him. I will not leave you. I do not care if I die here. I will not leave you alone. He gathered every last piece of strength he had and pushed. The beam shifted, just enough. The young scrambled free, and together they stumbled toward the entrance. Daniel collapsed the moment they reached clean air. He did not see the medical teams rushing toward him. He did not see Princess Elle pushing through the crowd. He did not see Queen standing in silence as her physicians worked desperately to save his life. He only felt hands lifting him, and then darkness. The last thing he heard before he lost consciousness was his voice, crying and thanking him through her tears. You saved him, you saved my brother. Why would you do this for us? Daniel could not answer, but somewhere in the darkness he smiled. Daniel woke in a bed softer than anything he had ever felt before. The ceiling above him was decorated with patterns of light that shifted and moved like living things. He tried to sit up, but his body protested with 100 different pains. Do not move yet, a voice said. Your body needs more time to heal. Daniel turned his head and found Queen sitting beside his bed. She was alone, without guards or attendants, watching him with an expression he could not read. "Where am I?" he asked. His voice was rough, his throat raw from the gas. "My personal medical chambers, the finest in the Empire. You have been unconscious for 3 days." The Queen paused. "My physicians say you should have died. The damage to your lungs, your skin, your internal organs. They have never seen a being survive such exposure." "Humans are stubborn," Daniel said weakly. "Yes, I am beginning to understand that." They sat in silence for a moment. Daniel noticed that the Queen seemed different somehow. The cold arrogance that had defined her since their first meeting was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like uncertainty. "Why did you do it?" she asked finally. "You risked everything to save lives, lives. The lives of those who had hurt you and mocked you and treated you as less than nothing. I do not understand." Daniel took a careful breath. "When I was in that corridor, Your Majesty, I did not see or slaves. I did not see enemies or friends. I only saw people who needed help, people who were scared and dying and had no one else coming for them." "But you could have died." "Yes. And that did not stop you." "No, where I come from we have a saying. The measure of a person is not what they do when things are easy. It is what they do when things are hard." Queen was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was different, softer. "I have ruled the Empire for 200 years. In that time, I have conquered countless worlds and seen countless species bow before us. I believed I understood strength. I believed strength meant power over others, the ability to destroy, to dominate, to force submission." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "Since you arrived, I have been studying your species, your history, your culture. I have read about your wars and your disasters and your endless struggle to survive. I have read about humans who gave their lives for strangers, doctors who traveled to disease zones knowing they might never return, soldiers who threw themselves on explosives to save their friends, parents who starved so their children could eat." She turned back to face him. "I have conquered dozens of species, human. Not one of them has ever shown me what you have shown me. Not one of them has ever made me question whether our way is the right way." Daniel did not know what to say, so he said nothing. "You saved 47 lives," the Queen continued. 6 of them were guards who had personally beaten you during your time here. You saved them anyway. My advisors cannot explain it. My philosophers cannot explain it. I cannot explain it." "There is nothing to explain, Your Majesty. They needed help. I could help. The rest did not matter." "But it should matter. That is what I do not understand. In our culture, debts must be paid. Insults must be answered. To help those who have harmed you is weakness." Daniel managed a small smile. "With respect, Your Majesty, I think you might be defining weakness wrong." The door opened and Princess Elle entered, followed by Ambassador Marsh and the rest of the human delegation. Elle rushed to Daniel's bedside, her alien face showing something that looked very much like relief. "You are awake," she said. "We were worried. The physicians said there was significant damage." "I am hard to kill," Daniel said. "Another human trait." Queen moved to the center of the room. Her presence immediately commanded attention. "Ambassador Marsh," she said formally, "I have reached a decision regarding the treaty between the Empire and humanity." Stepped forward, her face carefully neutral. "Yes, Your Majesty." "When your delegation arrived, I intended to offer you a simple non-aggression pact, a guarantee that the would not conquer your worlds in exchange for certain concessions. I considered humanity too weak to be worth more than that." She paused, and her eyes moved to Daniel. "I was wrong. I have never said those words before in my 200 years as queen, but I was wrong about humanity. You are not weak. You possess a kind of strength that the do not have, a strength that cannot be measured in claws or armor or military power." The Queen raised her voice so that it carried throughout the chamber. I am not offering humanity a non-aggression pact. I am offering a full alliance, equal partnership between our peoples, trade, cultural exchange, mutual defense, everything they have never offered to any species we have encountered. Ambassador Marsh's professional composure cracked for just a moment. Your Majesty, I do not know what to say. Say yes, Ambassador, and say thank you to your young aide. He has accomplished something no army could have achieved. The Queen turned to address the broader room, where nobles and officials had gathered. There is one more announcement. Effective immediately, I am ordering the gradual emancipation of all slaves within the Empire. This process will take time, but it will begin today. For too long, they have measured our worth by those we could dominate. Perhaps it is time we learn to measure worth differently. A murmur ran through the assembled. Some looked shocked, others looked uncertain, but none dared to protest. Princess Elle stepped forward. Mother, I have a request. Speak, daughter. I wish to serve as the first ambassador to Earth. I wish to learn more about these humans and their strange strength. Queen looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then, for the first time Daniel had ever seen, she smiled. I think that is an excellent idea. The formal ceremonies took several more hours. Treaties were signed, hands were shaken, and promises were made. By the time Daniel was cleared by the physicians to travel, a shuttle was waiting to take the human delegation home. Daniel stood on the landing platform, looking out at the alien city one last time. Princess Elle approached him, her movements hesitant in a way that seemed unusual for a royal. Thank you, she said quietly, for showing me that dreams are not weakness, for showing my mother that strength can take many forms. Thank you for asking questions, Daniel replied, for being willing to see things differently. Will I see you again on Earth? I hope so, Princess. I think our peoples have a lot to learn from each other. He boarded the shuttle and found a seat by the window. Ambassador Marsh sat down beside him. You know, she said, when I agreed to let the Queen take you as a servant, I thought I was sacrificing your safety for the mission. I never imagined you would accomplish more than our entire diplomatic team. Daniel shook his head. I did not accomplish anything, Ambassador. I just did what felt right. Sometimes that is all it takes. The shuttle lifted off and Daniel watched through the window as the throne world grew smaller beneath them. In the palace, Queen stood at her own window, watching the human vessel climb toward the stars. Commander Hal approached her. Your Majesty, I must ask, do you truly believe these humans are worthy of alliance? They are so fragile, so small. One determined warrior could kill a dozen of them. Queen did not turn from the window. Yes, Commander, one warrior could kill a dozen humans, but those humans would stand and fight anyway. They would protect each other until their last breath, and somehow, against all logic, they would find a way to rise again. She finally turned to face him. Any species that produces individuals like Daniel Cole is not to be underestimated. We have much to learn from them. I hope we are wise enough to learn. The human shuttle disappeared into the darkness between stars. And in the slave quarters of the palace, for the first time in living memory, the slaves lifted their heads and spoke to each other not of despair, but of tomorrow. The human who would not break had shown them something precious. He had shown them that hope was not foolishness. It was the greatest strength of all.